Let's talk some bollocks. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. I hope that got your attention. Now, this is going to be probably a relatively short video. Let's see how it goes. But essentially, this is a video that I'm doing off the cuff because sometimes in life something happens. You might be studying various things, training various things, but just something just comes to you, a moment of revelation or a different way of thinking of something. So very often on this channel, we look at questions of martial arts, reconstructing forgotten and lost martial arts, how certain weapons were used, why certain weapons were designed, how they were, sometimes peculiarities, things essentially we don't understand, and I'm going to come back to that point. But also, many of you will know that my background, educationally at least, is in archaeology. I studied archaeology and history at university, and for a short time I was actually a professional archaeologist. And very often you'll know that in archaeology, if they don't understand what something's for, or why something was built, or a certain weird object, they'll describe it as ritual. And this has become an in-joke, and such a joke actually, that it's even penetrated the YouTube kind of sword community, if you want to call it that. Very often in comments underneath my videos, I see people jokingly go, it must be ritual. Well, the funny thing is, and we have to say, some things were rituals. So quite clearly, if you go into a church or a mosque or a synagogue or whatever, there are things in there which very clearly are made the way they are because of ritual. And we can, if you didn't know, if you didn't have a Bible, or you didn't have a priest living, or a rabbi or whatever, you wouldn't be able to necessarily decipher really what that thing means. So, if we go back to old pagan religions, if we go back to Norse mythology and stuff, there are some things in there we don't really know what they mean. There was a discussion the other day about Thor's hammer. We don't really fully understand things about Thor's hammer. There's lots of ideas, there's lots of theories, but the fact is that we're missing a lot of that key data that we know stuff about Christianity or Judaism or whatever. We just don't have that for certain other things. So those things are ritual, and those are actually ritual. But sometimes there are material things, and we can't necessarily decipher why something's done a certain way, or why something's designed a certain way. Now those are two different things. So physically done a certain way. So if, for example, I saw a very interesting discussion the other day about how accurately we should recreate the footwork and stances as they are shown in German treatises, medieval German treatises, because there are some very specific positions which are types of stance and footwork and placement of the feet and stuff, which are shown in German treatises, which frankly some people are certainly training that way, and some people are doing something that looks like that in class, but when it comes to actually fencing or sparring or competing in tournaments or whatever, you see very, very little of that. And we see similar thing, of course. There's a divergence in traditional martial arts, or rather martial arts with living or semi-living lineages like Kenjutsu and Kendo, for example. There's a very big difference between what's done in most competitive Kendo clubs and what the Kenjutsu that it kind of came out of looks like. So there's always going to be a divergence, and people go, it's martial arts versus sport. True, but sometimes within a martial art as well, depending on how you train the martial art and the context of that particular martial art. And it can come down to individuals and all that kind of stuff. So clearly sometimes there are things in treatises and we don't know why they were done a certain way because we've lost that knowledge. Now, interestingly, a lot of people talk about HEMA as a dead, I suppose, a martial art that's being recreated or revived. There are living lineages within European martial arts, and equally, I have to say, I think people overestimate how living some of the Asian martial arts are, because there have been not uninterrupted transmission of teaching. So what is taught within a certain Chinese kung fu lineage, what's being taught in the class now might not be the same as what was being taught exactly 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 150 years ago. And that's also true of jiu-jitsu, it's also true of kenjutsu, and various other things, Eskrima, Kali, Filipino martial arts, and various other martial arts. So clearly there is a transition of of transmission of information that kind of drifts for various reasons, human reasons and all sorts of other reasons. So sometimes there's something in a treatise which we don't understand, and you get argument on the internet between people. So, you know, for example, I study Fiori de Liberis Fior de Battaglia, or Flos Duelatorum, depending which language you're using, Latin or Italian, and within the people who study Fiore, there is some divergence of how we do certain things. So not everyone forms a gioco largo and crociata in the same exact same way as I do. And there are reasons why we do that differently, and we have a discourse over that. Why do you do it like that? Why do I do it like this? Okay, who's right? We'll never know. Okay, so there are sometimes some things in the treatises that it's actually quite difficult to say, well, why do they do that instead of this, where this seems safer or quicker or easier or more logical, you know, less likely to fail. And sometimes there are things we don't understand, and we can't just put in the answer ritual. For the most part anyway, because it's not usually ritual. There is usually going to be a practical reason why they do a certain thing. Now, why am I holding a bollock dagger? Well, this is from Todd Cutler, by the way, just a little bit of a plug for him. But so we have talked in the past, why do bollock daggers have bollocks here? Well, clearly it's a phallic symbol. Clearly it's making a joke. Certainly these were sometimes worn in front of the crotch. And so there's a bit of a joke going on there, but there's also practicality reasons. It's not only to look a certain way. They're not literally made to look, you know, anatomically exactly like a person's nuts. They are also shaped in a way that is kind of strong and serves a grip purpose and stops the hand sliding up onto the blade and all this kind of stuff. So there are numerous reasons why these are designed like this. Now, the reason that I decided to make this video is I thought there's a great example. The other day I was making a cup of tea for myself and a cup of tea for Lucy, and I pour the water in. So I have sugar, she doesn't have sugar, but I pour the hot water in up to the same level in both mugs. But what happens after that point is actually different. So this is the allegorical part of the video and the reason that I'm making it. So what's interesting is if an archaeologist came along and saw these two identical types of mug, they're the same size, the same volume, the water's from the same kettle, has been boiled in the same way, we use the same tea bags. I have sugar, she doesn't have sugar. That's an interesting difference, and they could analyse that. But both the water's up to the same level. And so an archaeologist or a historian might make certain conclusions about how we're going to make the tea. Is that finished? Is that a finished drink? They don't necessarily know whether that's finished or whether I'm going to add other things to it. As it turns out, I do add other things to it, but they can't possibly know that. Now, in reality, I add a large amount of milk to Lucy's, and I add a teeny bit of milk to mine, and then I add a bit of cold water. So I top mine up to the same level, but mine has got less milk and it's got a little bit of cold water. Now, the reasons for that are entirely personal. Lucy likes a lot of milk. I like my drink slightly cooler. I can't, I've got a more sensitive mouth and I can't drink it when it's so hot. But the archaeologist and the historian could never possibly know those things and would have made lots of assumptions about those two mugs. They were unfinished, but there was no way they could know whether they were unfinished. They maybe might guess because the level's not right at the top. But they couldn't know for sure whether that mug of tea was finished or unfinished, whether it was going to be drunk like that, or what was going to be added to it and what degrees and why. And we can apply this, if you now extrapolate that, that little example out, if we extrapolate this and apply it to archaeology, maybe things we're digging in the ground, or if you apply it to the reconstruction of martial arts, which in many ways many people would call reconstructive archaeology, or living history. There's various things you could call it, but essentially it's trying to understand something from the past that we don't have a direct interface with apart from a book. And I think that might be an interesting way for some people to think about some of the challenges that we face in HEMA, but also just generally in historical interpretation and in archaeology as well. And really, just to remind people that we should never be absolute about our conclusions. And this is where I said I was going to come back to the we don't know. I think that I'm fairly good as an individual in just saying We don't know. But there are people out there in HEMA, in martial arts, and this is not just HEMA, in fact you could apply it to Japanese, Chinese, Filipino, whatever martial arts, where sometimes a student will ask them a question, oh, why do we, in this kata, why do we move the sword in this way before we do that cut? Wouldn't it be quicker to do? And the instructor will have a reason, and that is their reason. But in many cases, they don't necessarily know whether that is the correct reason. And I think it's good to remind ourselves to be truthful about that. And we can communicate that in the way that we say it. Well, I believe that we do this because of that, because I've noticed that when I do this, it covers my head better than when I make this transition, or whatever the explanation is. But of course, the person hundreds of years ago that formulated that kata may have had a very slightly different reason, or it may have been that reason and something else. He might have gone, yeah, he might, if you could go back in time, he might go, you're absolutely right, but if you think about it, it also does this. And you're like, oh yeah. And that's one of the reasons why it's really good to keep honest, open discussion about our interpretations of anything, not just HEMA, of archaeology, history, whatever. And be open to other people's inputs and ideas. And sometimes you get the most interesting theories and ideas I see in comments underneath my videos from people who aren't noted experts on a subject. They maybe don't even know very much about that subject, but they just go, oh, couldn't it be because so-and-so did something, so therefore you're gonna make this thing in that way. And you think, wow, damn, yeah, maybe it could. I mean, maybe it can be both of those things. These things aren't always mutually exclusive. Sometimes they can be inclusive of several things. So anyway, there we go. A rambling bollocks post. Some people might say that this video was a load of bollocks, but I think this is an important topic, and I think sometimes we need to put the weapons down. I know I'm holding a weapon, so there's an irony there, but sometimes we need to put the weapons down, sit down, and actually have a little bit of a chat about some of the theory behind historical interpretation and recreation, and that applies to HEMA. Believe it or not, it even applies to living lineage martial arts as well, where the transmission of information has just been through a different form, through teacher to student, teacher to student. That's still transference of information through history, or whether it's through treatises and manuscripts like in most HEMA, or indeed whether we're digging something in the ground and trying to work out why did these Romans put that wall across that room there. It could be any of those things, but it's all about methodology and applying that, frankly, to everything in life, including Lucy's cup of tea. Thanks for watching, and I hope I see you again soon on the channel. Cheers, folks.